Welcome to the Regents Roundtable. I'm Stephen Ludwig. My guest today is Aaron Clauset, a full professor. He was just promoted to full professor in computer science and faculty in the BIOS Frontiers Institute at the University of Colorado Boulder. Prior to joining the University of Colorado, Dr. Clausette was a fellow at the prestigious Santa Fe Institute. Dr. Clausette is an internationally recognized expert on network science, data science, and complex systems. His research has appeared in prestigious scientific venues like Science, Nature, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and many others. His work has also been covered in the popular press like the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Discover Magazine, New Scientist, Miller McCune, the Boston Globe, and The Guardian. Without further ado, welcome, Aaron, Dr. Clausette. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and congratulations. When were you promoted to full professor?
Just this past summer.
Oh, congratulations. That's super
Yeah,
exciting.
thank you. I'm
So,
excited to have crossed all the hurdles now.
how long did that take to go from associate, or is it associate or assistant?
Assistant, then associate, and then full. So I started at the University of Colorado in 2010 and was promoted to associate with tenure in 2018. And so my step from associate to full was relatively quick.
Oh, good for you. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to find out why from our conversation. So, jumping right in, it's been said that prestige to colleges and universities is like profit to business. They just soak it in. That desire to be more prestigious than the campus down the road or compared to peers has a lot of implications for trustees and regents. It impacts where money, attention, and rewards are focused. For people like you wanting to be full time tenured professors, it also has very large implications. You have argued that in the scientific, specifically, the scientific ecosystem, prestige chasing impacts who gets jobs and where, who gets published and where, who gets the resources, who gets to work on what ideas. And you bring up the really, for me, what's a very chilling question is how many good ideas are left unexplored because the lack of the right markers of prestige, meaning we're ignoring your idea because you're at the wrong university. So let's just start simply with the faculty, or there's no simple to this. Your research has showed some interesting trends in hiring, specifically for faculty in history, computer science, and business. What did you find when you looked at the hiring patterns for those professors?
Well, so it's a really interesting question. It's one that people have sort of been thinking about for a long time. Interest in sort of the social reproduction of faculty goes back to at least to Bordeaux, who was an eminent sociologist in the middle of the 20th century. But what he lacked was data, and so that's what has really changed. Is that in the past 15 years or so, people started collecting data on who hires whose graduates as faculty, and the top line finding is that really across all the research we've done, very little in academia makes sense except in the light of this prestige economy. And so what we found is that roughly 80% of all faculty, tenure-track faculty at research active, Ph.D. granting universities, are trained at only about 20% of institutions. And so this
Wow.
is the familiar sort of 80-20 rule that you find in many complex social systems,
Hmm.
that 80% of the revenue is obtained by 20% of the companies, et cetera, et cetera. And we see the same thing happen in the production of scholars, that the vast majority of active researchers who have faculty positions at our one universities, for instance, come from a very small set of very prestigious institutions.
Hmm.
And this is true across disciplines. So in our original 2015 study, we looked at history, computer science, and business, which are three very different fields in terms of scholarship. History
Hmm.
tends to write books; it's in the humanities. Business is more like a social science, and they write articles, and they tend not to have a lot of external funding. Whereas computer science is very collaborative, big research groups, and lots of external funding. And we see the same pattern in all three of these fields, suggesting that it's really a universal phenomenon, this 80-20 type rule in terms of who trains the researchers of the future.
Hmm. What are some of the colleges what are some of the universities we'd know? Like well, spoilers, I read the work you sent. So Stanford, MIT, what are some other big ones that people would know?
It's all the ones that you've heard of, essentially.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the most prestigious universities that train most of the faculty are the ones that everybody can think of. MIT, Harvard, Yale, Princeton's the Ivy League,
Mhm.
along with places like University of Texas in Austin, uh, UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, for computer
Mhm.
science in particular. So inside each discipline, everybody knows who the top schools are, and they're the ones
Mhm.
that everyone hires the graduates of as faculty.
Right. Are they so this is the are they really the top schools, or we all agreed that they're the top schools and that drives the decision making? I mean, your point of
Mhm.
you could where did you get your PhD?
My PhD is from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque.
Is that one of the 20%?
No,
How
no,
the
in
hell
computer
did you
science.
get a job?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah,
You'd have
yeah.
to ask. You'd have to ask the hiring committee that hired me.
Fair
Um,
enough.
but I mean, essentially, what happens is that these top schools, the ones who produce all the faculty, they are great schools. They have
Mhm.
great programs. They have world class researchers doing world class research and so on. And a key point here is that where you're trained is not your destiny. So pedigree is not destiny here. So I'm an
But it's
example of
but it's
how,
but it's but it sort of is. It's
statistically
not
speaking,
statistically, yeah. I mean, you're an
yes,
outlier.
I am unusual in the sense that I was able to land a tenure track job at a higher ranked university than I was trained at. And there are relatively few people like myself who swim upstream, so to speak. The vast
So
majority of people swim downstream.
okay, so walk me through that. So basically University of New Mexico is quote unquote less prestigious than the University of Colorado Boulder
Yes. UNM
for
is
whatever.
ranked maybe 100 or so, and Colorado is ranked around 40.
Okay. Normally the case would be you'd go from a place like CU Boulder to the
Yes.
university. You'd go the other way.
Yes.
Okay,
That's the
great.
normal pattern.
Yeah. And this brings up so you mentioned business, computer science, and history. Do you
Mhm.
think this is playing out for other disciplines?
We think so.
Yeah.
There have been other studies, usually single discipline studies. So people have looked at this kind of pattern inside political science. Usually political scientists do that, or inside sociology or inside information science. And each of these studies finds a similar pattern. And so the evidence in the literature suggests that this really is a universal pattern, that most disciplines experience this sort of prestige hierarchy in which a small group of departments train the vast majority of faculty everywhere.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit, but so let's say I want to be a tenured track faculty somewhere, but I can only get into, let's say, the University of Colorado Springs, my alma mater.
Yeah.
And I'll just make up computer science. I don't know if they have a PhD in that or not, but that's your background. And should I actually bother trying to do that from there? Because that seems like the only place I'm going to go from there is a community college. And I love community colleges, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but it's different than being a tenure track professor at a research institution.
Yes. So the thing that makes the graduates of the high prestige places very attractive for hiring is in part because they've done great research. Their departments are extremely research active, very well resourced, good social networks in terms of professional contacts and so on. And so the graduates who come out of those departments, they really do look great. They have great track records. They're doing good research. And so if you go to a less prestigious school and you want to have a faculty job in the system, then you have to essentially behave in the same way as the graduates from the more elite institutions behave. You have to network, you have to do high quality research, publish in the high quality places, et cetera. And that might be harder at a place that has fewer resources and is not as central in the professional network as these elite places are. And so you might have to hustle a little more in order to sort of overcome the resource deficit that your
A,
environment
a, li-
has.
a little more?
Possibly a lot more.
Well, so if 80% of the professors are coming from 20%
Mm.
of the institutions, that's a big hurdle to get over. Let's just
It
be
is, but
honest.
there's another subtlety here, which is, so for instance, University of Colorado Boulder, where I am, our PhD program, there are students here who want to be tenure track faculty, but most of them want to go to industry. And so
Okay.
our
That's fair.
graduate
Yep.
population,
Hmm.
yes, our graduate population is not
Hmm.
applying for tenure track jobs at quite the same rates as the graduates of a place like Stanford. And so there's another part of the equation, that getting a PhD, especially in computer science, is not
Hmm.
just about wanting to have a faculty job. It's also about the kind of education and training that you receive through the doctoral studies. And this is a pretty big change from how things were, say, in the 50s, in the 1950s, in which if you went into a PhD program, you were basically trained for one job and one job only, which was to be a professor. But today, that's not true at all. In fact, something like 95% of people who receive PhDs do not end up in academia. And so, to a first approximation, if
Okay,
you're
hold
in a
on.
doctoral training program,
On
yeah,
purpose, or right? So if 95%, I get like
yeah,
computer science, a
yeah,
bunch of the hard sciences, right? There's a lot of industry
yes,
jobs for those. If I get a PhD in English or philosophy or
yes, it is a bit
music
different
or
depending on the
yeah, I
field.
mean yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah.
not a lot of opportunities for me to do that.
That's right. But the size of the PhD programs are also different. So the number
Yeah.
of doctoral students in a English literature program is much, much smaller than the number of doctoral
Hmm.
students in my computer science program here, for instance. And it's in
Yeah.
part because the market has many more jobs. The larger economy has many more jobs for people with PhDs in STEM fields, essentially.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, as a result, the students are not dumb. Students are extremely smart.
Hmm.
They may not know exactly what the market in terms of academia is going to be wanting to hire in 5 years, but they definitely have a sense of the economic sort of marketability of a PhD in different fields. And that's why people are flocking to computer science and data science PhD programs, is because they're fantastic training for high paying jobs in the tech industry.
Hmm. Now that's specific to the tech industry. So the Wall Street Journal has done some really great reporting in the past couple years about the graduate programs at small, prestigious schools, private generally, that
Yes.
charge a bucket of money, and the students are having a hard time finding work.
Mhm.
And as a regent, you're an academic, Aaron. You bring stuff to me. You've done all this work. You've gone through all this committee work to bring a new degree to me to approve. And it's like, well, I'm not going to say no, because if I say no, then someone should lose a job, quite frankly. Like something's gone horribly wrong. But because I'm not an academic. As a trustee or
Yes.
regent, I'm not an academic. I have to
Yes.
trust you to bring forward.
Yeah.
But I always had this sinking feeling that sometimes we were creating new programs that were based on wishful thinking. And the analogy I've come up with, and this is a little bit mixed between master's programs and PhD programs, so we can split them apart.
Yep.
But a lot of times it feels like we operate like Las Vegas, meaning the university is the house,
Hmm.
the student are the gambler, and the challenge is these really bright, talented adults have been successful their entire academic careers. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten where they are. And so they assume they're going to win. But we know the odds, right? So we know that 95% of people getting a PhD are not going into academia, whether they want to or not.
Hmm.
And so, how do you think trustees or regents should pay attention to that gnawing feeling I might have had when it comes to approving, let's say, new PhD programs?
I think this is a hard question, and I don't envy regents who have to make this decision about approving new degree programs at universities. And you're right that academic faculty, we our life is scholarship, and so our interests are primarily in the direction of the scholarship, and our expertise is in that direction. And so, if faculty come to the regents with a proposal for a new degree program, they're probably primarily thinking about the scholarship aspect of that degree program, especially at the doctoral level.
Mhm.
Master's programs are a little bit different because those are not necessarily degrees that most people go on to have faculty jobs with. So they're not intended as terminal degrees for academia. Instead, they are much more about sort of advanced professional training. And there, I think that there's a legitimate question as to whether or not the external market really is going to demand people with this kind of master's degree. There are many master's degrees that are well worth the money that you pay for them, computer science
Couldn't
being
ag-
one of them.
could, couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
But
please
for the
continue.
one
Yeah.
for if a master's degree in English literature, it's not as clear. I think that maybe there the bar needs to be a little bit higher because there the university is implicitly making a bet about the external economy's demand for that kind of
Mhm.
training. Now, there's a second aspect of this question though, which is universities are not just about job training. They are also about knowledge preservation. And one of the oldest roles that universities play is remembering sort of the knowledge and scholarship that we as a human species have produced for posterity. And so having degree programs sort of oriented around new areas of scholarship that are worth remembering for society is also a part of the mission of universities. And so that could be a factor that might lead a board of regents to say, yes, we are going to approve this degree program, but at a small scale because it is an important area of scholarship, and we agree with the faculty that this is something that we should support. And so, in that sense, there's an argument to be made that universities should be subsidizing some areas of scholarship that the external economy would not necessarily support entirely.
I think that's a really important point you bring up. As many challenges I have is sometimes how we prioritize stuff. I do think like Greek literature somebody needs to make sure that we preserve that. We need to do African studies, and we need to do things that are just not going to, or Asians, whatever the topic is.
American
Yes,
history.
all of it. We need to
Yeah.
be sure that we pay, and it's a hard conversation when dollars are limited and what you have, but I do think that is part of the mission, and that's a uh, very important thing to remember. Again, I just have a hard time if we're letting. This
Yeah.
is again my concern. If we're having PhD candidates with any expectation of getting a tenure track job, I just don't want to mislead people, and then that's a thing. So let's
I,
switch.
I
Let's
think that
switch. Yeah,
w- I
please
think
finish.
that
No, go. Yeah.
one thing that universities could probably do better at, and I'm not the first person to point this out by any measure, is they could be a little bit more honest and upfront. They could publish statistics, for instance, about what fraction of
Wait,
their
hold
graduates
on.
go on.
What? No, no, no. That's a terrible idea. I'm sorry, continue. I'm being very facetious. Please continue your point.
I I understand exactly where you're coming
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
So the fact that 95% of people who get PhDs don't end up with tenure track jobs, I think most students kind of have a sense that it's in that direction, but they may not know that it's really 95%. They may think it's like half or something like that. But this is something that departments could track better, and universities perhaps could help support the departments tracking this because departments often don't have the resources themselves to keep track of their own graduates. But just to sort of have a sense of like what are the jobs that our PhD graduates go on to have. And that may actually be a good marketing thing because if a
Mhm.
particular program has created a good pipeline for, say, the English literature PhDs going on to being reporters at nationally recognized and respected journalistic venues, then
Mhm.
that could be very attractive to people who want to have that kind of a career. They recognize, this PhD program, yes, I'll do my PhD work. The scholarship is really important, but like there's a connection in the professional network to a job that I'm really interested in having if academia doesn't work out for me. And I think that would really help students make better decisions about navigating this large sort of complicated system because academia is full of hidden traditions and norms and information, and that information asymmetry is something that I think we could do more on the university side to try to help students navigate.
I more transparency is better, right? And then I get to make an informed decision whether I want to roll those dice or not. I
Yes.
personally don't believe any education's wasted. So
Mhm.
if someone gets a PhD and their career plans don't work out, I don't think that's wasted, but that's my point of view. That might not be their point of view. I met some very angry people with PhDs that couldn't get into academia, and it's like you kind of knew like I'm not being dismissive, but it's like, and that's the Las Vegas thing. It's like I've won at every game I've ever played. I'm going to win at this one too, and we all fall into that trap. So if I love your transparency idea.
Yeah.
Some of your research you showed. Sorry, did you have another point?
That's good.
Okay. Some of your research has showed the type of families that faculty, the tenure track faculty tend to come from. So
Mhm.
let me draw that picture that you drew in the slide deck I looked at. So if 80% of all the faculty come from 20% of the institutions, those 20% of the institutions are getting people in their PhD programs that have a fairly similar demographic, socioeconomic background, correct?
That's right.
Can you explain what that is?
So we conducted a study in which we wanted to find out something about the socioeconomic background of people who become tenure track faculty. And we did a large scale survey and had a fantastic response across 8 different academic fields. And what we found is that the rate at which people with faculty jobs, so tenure track faculty jobs, have highly educated parents is just off the scale. It's like 25 times more common that a faculty has a PhD holding parent, not necessarily a faculty parent, but just a PhD holding parent
Yeah.
than the general population. And so there's this massive advantage essentially in the competition for faculty jobs that comes from having highly educated parents. 50% of faculty have parents with at least a master's degree. And so this is suggesting that the socioeconomic background of the faculty is very different from the larger population in the United States. And the implication is that this might change the kind of scholarship that the faculty are pursuing.
Like what?
What are the interests and the concerns of highly educated people? And that's
Oh,
going to
yeah.
inform the kinds of questions that they
Hmm.
pursue. And
They might
it
not do the research on how far food stamps are going to take me if they've never been on food stamp. And that's a gross oversimplification, but that's your point. Yes.
essentially that there will
Yeah.
be many fewer faculty who are interested in that question because their lives never intersected with that part of the broad sort of tapestry of American life. And so that it means that there may be many very interesting questions, particularly in the social sciences or economic
Hmm.
sciences, that are left off the table because the people who become faculty are simply not even aware or interested in those questions.
Is this a case? So studies have shown the most likely indicator if an individual is going to go pursue a bachelor's degree is if one or both of their parents have a bachelor's degree. That's
Yeah.
been shown over and over. So does this mean for the PhD folks, does this mean children are more likely to go into their parents' line of work, or is there something else going? It's like I was an actor, my kids are gonna be actors just because they know how to get it done.
Well, certainly there's an advantage that comes from having a role model, in your household. You become as a child more aware of that type of career, and you probably think more positively of it, although not always. Some children of famous actors are like, "No way,
Nope.
never going to do that. Go have a farm somewhere and be as far away from Hollywood as possible." So
Excellent, excellent point. Yeah, yeah.
there's certainly an advantage that comes from having those role models sort of in your childhood environment. But it may be more than that. And this is a point we make in the paper. Our paper is largely descriptive. So we don't really get to causality. We are not able to pin down why it is exactly that that faculty are so much more likely than the general population to have such highly educated parents. But it's not hard to enumerate hypotheses, something about the value of education, that if you are educated, you see the value of that education and you want your children to have that value too. And so you reshape their childhood in order to sort of encourage that affection towards education. There could be other mechanisms too. There's lots of things have been written about what's called the hidden curriculum in academia, just sort of knowing about who can ask questions and how to ask questions and how to get extra help and so on. And if you have highly educated parents, you may simply be more aware of those things, or your parents tell you like, "Why didn't you do this?" And then you go do it. Whereas if you're a first gen college graduate, then your parents don't have that information, and so they can't really help you navigate the complexity of academia. And so we don't know exactly why it is, but there's another little detail to this, which is just as with our other studies about prestige, we looked at prestige with socioeconomic backgrounds as well, and we found that having a parent with a PhD is even more likely, twice as likely at the elite institutions as it is at the non-elite institutions. So now we're talking about a factor of 50 enrichment among the elite faculty. And this suggests that our notion of meritocracy in academia is we may think we're looking at real merit, but we are also actually looking at accumulated advantages that come from socioeconomic backgrounds. So if you have a highly educated family as a child, there are many opportunities that will allow you to present greater merit in a meritocratic competition, and therefore you're more likely to win those competitions. And that's, we think, what leads to this additional enrichment in which children of highly educated families are even more likely to end up as faculty at elite
Mhm.
universities than non-elite universities.
The
It feels unfair in some ways, and yet that's the meritocratic system that we live in.
What and I have advantages and I get more advantages and I get more advantages and I get more advantages and I win and I go, well, it was all my own doing.
Mhm.
Right. Born on third base
We
thinking I hit a triple. Yeah.
yes, yes,
What would you yeah.
or you get to first base and then you manage to get to second base, then you manage to get to third base, and we call that cumulative advantage
Mhm.
in the science of science, in which each little competition that you win gives you some boost to win in the next one. It's kind of like you look at some of these really famous academics, and you look at the awards that they've won, and they've won like 50 or 60 awards. And you're like, that's a lot of awards. Well, it's because the probability of winning an award goes up with each additional award you win. And so that's cumulative advantage. And we see the same kind of thing in many different aspects in academia, in terms of scholarship, in terms of faculty jobs, et cetera. So cumulative advantage is a really deep part of our society in many ways, and it intersects with other aspects of success in America for sure.
What boy, this is a book I'm about to ask. I don't expect you to have a good answer. How's that for but it needs to be
Go
we
for
need
it.
to talk about it. Because you've painted a good picture, and in the materials that I've read of yours, you acknowledge this challenges. So colleges and universities rightly want to diversify their faculty so they're more representative of the general US population.
Yep.
It's important, it's good, it's not a political thing, it's just a smart thing to do, and it's important because you learn so much more. However, if we keep hiring faculty from this small group of prestigious institutions, and those faculty are coming from families that have some level of prestige, when we could
Mhm,
argue what that is,
mhm.
how can colleges and universities achieve this goal of diversifying faculty, getting better viewpoints, having this creative thing, if we have this pipeline that's sort of fixed? What's the do you have any ideas how we would begin to navigate that?
It's a really important question, and it's also a really hard problem to solve because the prestige economy in among research active universities drives many decisions. As you pointed out earlier, prestige is a fundamental resource to them because it leads to many other things. It leads to more alumni donors. It leads to more selective admissions. Higher test scores among applicants, more faculty want to be there,
It's all about the institution,
everything.
all about the institution, all about the institution, all about the institution, not about the students.
Yes.
But that's perhaps I'm digressing. Please continue.
Yeah, that's a very excellent point too. So the point here is that prestige is a fundamental value for these institutions, and that makes it very difficult to get off that racetrack, because if you're laser focused on competing with the other elite institutions, if you're MIT, you're very concerned about your reputation. You don't want to lose status relative to your competitors, because to do so would mean a loss of resources and presumably, this is the assumption, presumably loss of
Mhm,
quality for the students themselves. And so the institutions are incentivized to do everything they can to maintain their status as an elite
mhm,
institution. And if the competition has sort of narrowed to a very specific set of dimensions in terms of like the number of high profile publications, or the amount of grant dollars, or the number of Nobel prizes, it can be very difficult to broaden your scope, to see that there is value in things that are outside your narrow definition of what merit really is. And so this sets up a conflict between the desire for maintaining status in the prestige competition, and also the desire to be more inclusive of all different ideas and people in order to broaden access to the benefits of education. And different universities are making sort of different progress at resolving this tension in some ways. Most of them not very successfully. It's very difficult. Even in the faculty hiring side of the world, there's often a conversation about how, we're mostly a white man department. It would be nice to have some other ideas around here, because we want to be good role models to our diversifying student population, and we recognize that like not everybody can identify with a bunch of old white men. Maybe we should have some people who look like them, who can be better role models for them. and who can connect
Also, as
better
you
with the students.
well, and also
Yeah,
represent different ideas that I'll just miss. I'll just miss
that's right.
stuff. I'm a guy. I'm going to miss some stuff. It's
Yes,
like I don't. I'm
yes.
not a woman. I'm not. You know, fill in the blank. And so it's like I'm going to miss something, and that by not having that, we miss presenting that to the students. In addition to your comment about role models. Yeah.
Precisely. There are really
Yeah.
two arguments, two main arguments for why you should diversify the faculty at a university. One is the utilitarian argument, which is that if you have a broader sociodemographic diversity in your faculty, one that looks more like the U.S. population as a whole, then you will have different ideas produced, and you'll have better scholarship. So the utility for society is larger because the range of ideas is broader because the range of people and their background is broader. That's one. But the other is social justice, which is that there's sort of a moral imperative that the people in this very special part of society, the faculty who both train future researchers and produce new ideas, should be accessible in equal proportion to the population's own diversity. And so these two arguments are different, and different people prefer one versus the other. The utilitarian one is the one that you hear most often today, but the social justice one is one that people also talk about. And so when a university or a department wants to pursue diversifying its faculty, it often encounters pushback from the perspective of, well, we don't want to compromise our prestige or our reputation or our quality just to broaden our diversity. And that is a roadblock because that person who makes that comment, they have a definition in their head of what merit is, and they're not willing to broaden that definition to see the value that comes
Mhm.
from other types of things in the world. And in some sense, this is very disappointing because as a scholar, we should know that research is really hard. And the more ideas, the more eyes, the more perspectives you have on a hard problem, the more likely you are to crack that nut. And in fact, scholarship shows that that's true, that diversity for hard problems, intellectual problems, improves the rate at which you can solve them and the quality of the solution that you get to it. And so being able to broaden your definition of merit is really the only solution in order to crack this nut. If we want to diversify the faculty at universities, we have to adjust our notion of what it means to be meritorious, to not just be basically rich white men.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and this is probably an unfair brush, but faculty tend to be all for diversity for all the reasons you say, except when it comes to my department, because I need to make sure that my prestige doesn't get diminished, right? And so it's
That's
it's
that's
it's
often the revealed
yeah,
preference. Yes.
yeah. And so the question I've been struggling with, because I agree with when we look at the prestige economy in higher education, it's obvious, and your research really helps bring facts to the much needed data and facts to the table. And so I'm thinking about, if the prestige economy works, how do you create another set of prestige for institutions that comes with intellectual rewards, financial rewards, and all the rewards that we need, that so we are incentivized, although we're smart people, we think we're above that, right? But we're incentivized to behave a certain way. So what are the incentives that we need to develop as a
Mhm.
society? Because it's not, my argument would be, it's not the institution's fault, because philanthropies, donors, nonprofits, lawmakers, policymakers, fill in the blank, we all love this prestige thing because we're trying to get our kids
We
to go
sure
there,
do. We
right?
sure do.
And
And
so,
the best example I know of how uh, sort of dominant this prestige economy is you look at where the really really rich people give their money. They're going to give $100 million gift to higher education. To fund
Harvard,
posterity and help
yeah,
science
yeah,
or whatever. And where do they give it? They give it to
mhm,
Harvard or Yale or Stanford. And when they do the press release in order to explain why they gave it to Harvard, they say, we want the most benefit to come from this gift. And so, I mean, yes, Harvard is a fantastic institution. They do amazing things. But if you really wanted to have the largest impact on improving higher education and education in general and moving the needle from a society's perspective, Harvard doesn't need another $100 billion. They have 35 billion already. Instead, you give it
It's
to
a it's a
UC.
it's a rounding error at this point.
That's right.
100 million is a rounding error.
Instead, you give it to the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs,
Yeah.
because 100 million would transform that institution from top to bottom in a way
Mhm.
that would not happen in the next 20 years without that money. And
Mhm.
there are some philanthropists who seem to get that. So, for instance, there are a few now who are giving money to historically Black colleges and universities.
Mhm.
And this is an amazing change in terms of the way that philanthropy is operating now, is that they're looking at sort of the return on the investment. How much can we lift the bar, as opposed to, let me just get the prestige of Harvard associated with my name. And I think that's a genuine improvement, but there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of changing people's orientation toward the prestige economy, for them to recognize that, as you said, the universities have an incentive to maintain their status. And so they are not benign actors inside the prestige economy. And so if you as an individual really want to change things, then you should not trust Harvard. You should not trust
Mhm.
Stanford, right? Like, they're not in it for you, they're in it for
Right.
themselves.
What do you think a trustee or board this, this podcast is really for people that are doing what I used to do. Like,
Yeah,
what could they do to provide an incentive? Because look, we're operating in this world. I believe in taking the world as it is and dealing with what's so. So we're dealing with
yeah,
a prestige economy. What
yeah.
can a board member trustee do with their leadership to figure out, okay, we need to shift something here. What and again, I didn't ask you about this in advance, so I'm just popping it on you. Do you have any ideas that come to the top of your head?
I should preface my remark by saying that I have done no research on this
Great.
question,
No,
and
this is
so I have
spitball. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have no expertise
Oh, hold on
from
a second.
which to
How
speak
to how
from.
to make researchers uncomfortable. Ask them just to make up something
Yes,
with no
exactly.
data. Okay, great.
I,
You're off the hook. So if this
speculation.
doesn't work out, you're off the hook. How's that sound?
Okay, speculation is something that we are
Mhm.
taught not to do, basically. um, I we might scrub this question. It's a hard question to answer, because the prestige economy is an ecosystem, really.
Mhm.
We use the word economy just because it's something that many people. It's a word that many people recognize, but ecosystem, I think, is a better term, because there are many different actors with different agendas, and the
Mhm.
interactions among them constrain the range of possibilities that any one of them can do. And so, if you're a board of regents at a mid-tier university,
Mhm.
you have to swim upstream, essentially, in this ecosystem, and that's really hard. Like, there are
Mhm.
limited things that you can do, because many people simply won't talk to you because you're not a Harvard or a Stanford. And so I really don't know what advice I would give to
Hold on.
regents
So here,
about this.
but here's actually something that what you shared is super helpful. Just the way you further described the context of what they're operating in. So as you were answering, I formulated a response to my own question, which
Great.
is have the conversation.
Mhm.
So it's not us, it's there's no ABC solution. It's understanding the context. Because I don't think we don't talk about this generally in higher education. We never had this conversation in the 12 years I was a board member, going
Yeah.
to things, national conferences for board members. This conversation didn't come up. So just having the conversation of how does the prestige economy impact us, do we want to play more of that game? Do we want to double down on the people we're serving? So
Mm.
one of the challenges I have is this mission creep. It's like, well, I want to move up the prestige ladder. It's like, well, we're doing a great job serving who we've serving. Let's continue to serve them, but do it better. And so there's those conversations. And I think that actually, if I may, on our behalf, say have the conversation might be the advice I'd give my fellow trustees and regents.
I really like that advice, because even just making the prestige economy or the prestige ecosystem an explicit topic of conversation allows everybody to see it and to see the effects that it has on things. And that gives us the choice to not play that game. If you want to convince a you know philanthropist to support an institution like UCCS, then you have to play to your strengths. But your strengths are in part that you're not prestigious, right?
Right.
That if they want to support true impact on education, to really support the students who have different ideas, that could, with some help, change scholarship in a way that giving more money to Harvard isn't going to do, that's the pitch you make to them. You make the pitch that you're not prestigious, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation, and this has really been fun and interesting and thought provoking. But I like to ask all my guests, what do you like most about working in higher education?
I don't think I can only give you one thing, so I'll give you two. The first is that I love the students. They are energizing and energetic and thoughtful and creative, and the future is bright in part because the students are so amazing. They challenge me in ways that I wouldn't expect, and they get me thinking about things. They expand my sort of view of scholarship and ideas in ways that I wouldn't get if I was at a pure research institution, not also teaching. So that's true for the doctoral students I teach, the master students, and the undergraduates. It's one of the most energizing parts of the job is just to basically be seeing the future and feeling so optimistic that like, okay, we're going to be okay. If we could do justice to these young people, then they'll help us navigate the future. But the second part is, as a scholar, I love the freedom that I have to pursue the ideas that are interesting to me. And there are very few jobs in the world that really give you that freedom to have a crazy idea and be like, I'm going to figure out what's going on with this and maybe write something up to share with the world about it. And that is incredibly energizing as well. So those two things are what really make me excited about higher education.